How you doing tonight? IB Nation Sports Talk is up and running once again. I'm Sean Stiers. He's Jesse Stiers. He should be feeling better today after last night, but a little bit under the weather this evening. Hopefully you're doing somewhat well after yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, I was 6-0 on the weekend and 1-0 in the game that mattered the most. So I would say that I had a pretty, fired up weekend. I was on fire all weekend, and then I've been running around all of Ohio the last couple of days visiting various projects of mine and starting to feel sick again. And it's literally the same symptoms that I had 2 weeks ago. So if I recatch what I had 2 weeks ago, I'm going to be very upset.
I would be upset as well. Well, hopefully you get over that very soon and don't spread whatever it is halfway across Ohio. But Salty was I just saw, where was it? Salty was apparently expecting us. There it is, to be decked out in Cowboys gear today. We did not pack it on. We're not going to totally gloat, but I mean, come on. They won last night. I still don't know how much to put, how much stock to put in it. I was, of course, midway through the third quarter when the Cowboys are winning pretty good. I get a text from my old buddy Doug, who Jesse, who is a 49ers fan.
Well, caveat, he's a 49ers and a Chiefs
fan. Yeah.
He's the worst kind of sporting fan there is, because I don't believe in having more than one, favorite team or team that you root for.
I think it's harder in football as well to have multiple teams. There's a lot more energy expended cheering for your football team, and to be cheering for two, I don't know. But of course, he got the Chiefs Niners Super Bowl a couple of years ago. But he starts texting me, "So you ready for the rematch?" And then it's like boom, boom, boom. I start getting this barrage of texts from him, and it's like, "Look, dude, this game ain't over yet. I'm not talking about next week. And I'm not going to answer a million random questions that you have." It's like he knows I'm a captive audience because he knows I'm going to be sitting in front of the TV. But that is not the time to start pounding me with texts that have nothing to do with the game. So, what did have anything to do with the game? How about 4 missed extra points? And I saw this morning, the score was 31-14, 44 total points. The over-under going into the game, 45.5. And Brett Maher, of course, missed 4 extra points in that game. And I saw that like Fred Taylor and Derek Mason, a couple former NFL guys, were tweeting, asking if Maher was point shaving. And there were other people who were literally ticked off, like the actual gamblers, accusing him of point shaving, as if he knows in the first quarter how many points the Cowboys are going to end up scoring and how close to 45.5 they're going to end up being. It was frustrating, though, because I'll tell you what, when he missed that second one, I'm sitting there going, they're going to lose by 2 points, or they're going to lose by something stupid is going to happen. Fortunately, that didn't happen, but 4 missed extra points in one game. You could literally go find a high school kid who could go bang home 4 extra points for you.
Well, being the math kind of nerd that I am, I saw a stat that kickers are making 92.5% of the extra points, and to miss 4 straight consecutive independent events at that rate would be 1 in 31,600. So what he did last night was essentially 1 in 31,600. I'm on the team of, I think something fishy was going on. I understand missing maybe 1 or 2, but when we got into the stage 3 and stage 4, so I think Vegas phoned him in during the game and said, "Hey, you need to do a little point shaving here because there's a lot of bets on the over tonight."
I mean, I loved it on 4th down when it's 4th and goal, and Maher starts trotting his little butt out on the field like, "I'm going to go kick this field goal here." And they're like, "No, we're going for it. Sorry, just stay on the sideline." In his defense, he's been a great kicker. I mean, he's been a very accurate field goal kicker all season long. So, like, to go to your conspiracy theory point, as good as he has been, there is some suspicion when you're missing 4 chip shots. What I want to know is why he's kicking from the hashes, because you do have the option to kick, straight up the middle, right? Like you don't have to kick from a hash, I don't think, if you don't want to.
That is also correct. You do not have to kick from a hash. So
Yeah.
it's like, sorry, I'm looking it up right now. His like extra points made this season. It's like, I'm pretty sure that's his only. He only missed like one or two other times, and the other one was to end the game against Washington. So technically, he missed 5 consecutive extra
5 in
points.
a row. Yep. I was rewatching some of it today on NFL Network. They always replay whatever the primetime game is the next day, so they were re-showing it, and I heard old Joe Buck say that. But hey, they beat Tampa Bay, and you can say what you want about Tampa Bay, but San Francisco, Cincinnati, Kansas City were the only 3 teams to score more points against Tampa Bay this season. So
I mean, they completely dominated that game last night, but going forward, it is a concern with Maher because a game like San Francisco and potentially NFC Championship, those games are going to come down to slim margins, and you're going to need your field goal kicker to hit some crucial ones.
Yeah, and Maher, as Larry said, set a Cowboy record for points scored by a kicker, which is crazy to think that he did that. It's like he did that.
He's just got the yips. I think he's all in his head right now, and that's
better get it figured out.
Do.
Yeah, like there was a report today where they're going to keep him. They're not going to try to move on. I don't know who you're going to find at this point in the season. You're moving into the divisional rounds of the playoffs. It's not like there's a surplus of kickers who can kick 55-yard field goals who are just hanging around out there, and that's pretty important, I think. I don't know. Hey, we'll have more in rapid fire. We've got plenty in rapid fire later. Let's talk about the more pressing issue of the day, though. Notre Dame and the offense. And before we do that, please hit the like button if you would. You help us out. You help out Irish Breakdown, the IB channel, the YouTube channel, all of our podcasts as well. Hit the like button on YouTube. Subscribe to our channel. Rate, review, give us a 5-star rating on your podcast platform of choice as well, if you would. Notre Dame's top offensive questions as of right now, midway through January, the guys are getting back on campus, getting into class for the spring semester. That means spring practice is month and a half, something like that away at this point. What is the biggest offensive question you have right now, Jesse?
I think the biggest offensive question I have for Tommy Rees going forward is, what is his mark of consistency, or what is his measure of consistency? Because sometimes we see some brilliant game plans, and it seems like we see, offensive play sets that are really centered around, utilizing Notre Dame's talents and best players. And then other games, it doesn't seem quite so. And rather than kind of maybe making some adjustments, there's kind of like this mentality of just kind of continuing to plow forward with the same plan, essentially. So one off is, how can you be consistent every game? And obviously failures are going to happen, but what kind of adjustments are you going to make when adversity kind of starts to hit, a la Marshall, Stanford, games like that, when you're kind of stinking the place up a little bit? What can you do to get out of your funk?
Yeah, it's interesting because we've talked about in-game adjustments, and I think we were just talking about them last week, as a matter of fact, like the ability or inability to make in-game adjustments by different coaches, whether it was Marcus Freeman, Tommy Rees, Al Golden. And you were telling me about something that Peyton Manning said during the Manning cast of the Monday night game last night.
Yeah, so last night on the Manning cast, and again, I don't know how much this translates into the college game, but Peyton literally said in his 18-year career in the NFL that halftime adjustments are a myth, or going into the locker room for adjustments are a myth. In his 18-year career, his routine every time was the same at halftime. He'd go in, take a piss, eat some oranges, and 2 minutes later, the coach would say it's time to go, and he'd go running back out onto the field. So again, I don't know if that's, NFL, if that's Peyton Manning, but we were also talking about it. Like in the NFL, you have like 2 seconds in the locker room before you have to come back out. And of course, in college, there's band performances, there's TV, halftime report, all that stuff. So it's the college halftime is double, if not even 2.5 times longer than what the NFL was.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. Because like Jason is saying, Eli chimed in saying not enough time for anything, and that's exactly right. There's like, what is it, like 11 or 12 minutes or something like that in the NFL that you get for halftime? It's like twice as long, almost 30 minutes, and it seems longer than 30 minutes sometimes for a college game. So there's obviously a lot more time in a college game to work on that kind of stuff. But I mean, and you shouldn't even need to go to the locker room to make adjustments, though, should you?
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, you got guys in the box that are watching everything.
right. And I
You
mean,
even
you've got
have
video,
boards on
you've
the
got instant,
sideline.
yeah, you've got instant photos and all that kind of stuff, and everyone's got all their digital technology. Like, if you're a coordinator, especially one who's sitting up in the booth, and you see, okay, these guys are doing this, well, we need to adapt. It shouldn't take going to the locker room to make those kind of changes. And in fact, I think Al Golden said about a year ago, well, not quite a year ago at this time, because he got hired right after the Super Bowl, but he talked about in the NFL, you're constantly, making adjustments on the sideline based on things that are going on in the course of the game, which is kind of amazing to hear him, to think about him saying that now, considering the lack of adjustments that we saw sometimes from his defense this season, especially earlier in the season.
Yeah, in my limited amount of experience, there were times on the sideline where our defensive coordinator slash linebacker coach in college, we would come off the field, or the starting defense would come off the field after a specific series, and then if a play gashed us, or if it's a play that we hadn't seen all week or practiced for all week, we had a whiteboard and we immediately would sit down and kind of go over what our fix would be. So I would consider that, an in-game adjustment. And I'd have to imagine that with today, with having, the pads and, much more people up in the box and that kind of stuff, you can get it done relatively even quicker.
So I think the biggest question I have for this offense right now, and we've got kind of a list of some different questions, and obviously for the people in the chat, if you have questions, comments, concerns, whatever, you can throw them up there as well. But my biggest question is, what's the predominant personnel package going to be? Because it has been 12 personnel heavy in recent years, as in 2 tight ends, 1 running back, and obviously sometimes even 13. But that's because that position group, the tight end group, was the strength of the offensive skill groups, but that has shifted to running back now, and we've talked about this a little bit. So here's my question to you: how would you split these personnel packages in terms of the percentage of time that you think that they will use these? Like multiple running backs, whether it's 21, 20, 30, whatever. So like multiple running back sets versus 11 personnel, one tight end, 1 running back, 3 wide receivers, or 12 personnel, 1 running back, 2 tight ends, 2 wide receivers. What, like, if you're going to slide those, you've got what percentages would you apply to those based on?
Yeah, so the way I look at it is, or the way I'll break it down is 2 running back sets, 2 tight end sets, and then kind of the field. Because outside of that, I think that you can, everything kind of falls under that field type situation. So for me, I would go 30% 2 tight end, 30% 2 backs, and then the remaining, personnel packages would get my final 40%. I think overall what I'm trying to say is I would match my 2 tight end sets with, I would match my 2 tight end sets with my 2 running back sets and have them completely marry each other. Sorry, I was having some. Can you hear that noise in the background?
All right, so I think I'm back. Is that any better, Jess?
Yeah, there was this really weird kind of like clacking noise that was going
Yeah.
on as soon as
I don't know what it is with this microphone, but every once in a while, like I can't hear it here, but I had muted myself because I had to cough. And yeah, so like every once in a while, my mic just starts doing that crazy stuff. So that's fun.
So back to what I was saying, I'd go
So
30.
hold it, rewind, because I was calling you out on your math for a math major. You were saying you said 30%, and then 45%, I
40%.
believe. Okay, so 40%. Okay, so go back 30% on.
Two tight
Give
end
me your
sets.
percentages again.
30% on two tight end sets, 30% on two running back sets, and then the field, everything else, whatever pairings you want to come up with outside of that, I think would fall under the 40% umbrella. But really, what I'm trying to get at is I think that the two tight end and two back sets need to equal each other. If that's 15 and 15, and then the rest gets the remainder. If that's 20 and 20, and the rest gets the remainder, I would just like to see equal distribution of two tight end sets with two running back sets next year. And I think that's very feasible considering the running back room and the potential, I won't even say potential, the drop off in the tight end room with Mayer leaving.
And I get excuse me. I guess the biggest question is just to what extent Sam Hartman, you know, changes the offense. Having a quarterback with so much more experience and knowing how to get the ball to receivers, like, will the receivers, especially a young group of receivers, because even the veterans aren't, really experienced, are they capable of carrying the load? I guess, that's a big question to me. And you're not going to have Michael Mayer, so you don't necessarily, have to like start with Michael Mayer and everyone else sort of builds around him where you're always going to have that tight end on the field. I think that there are going to be a lot of times where you don't even have to have a tight end on the field, depending on what you're doing. And we're going to talk about the running backs specifically here in a minute. But again, it's like you've got Audric Estime, you've got Logan Diggs, you've got Chris Tyree, you're going to throw Jadarian Price into the mix. You've got Jeremiah Love coming in, and you also have Jabron Payne. So, like, you've got a surplus of running backs, assuming everyone stays healthy. To me, it's like the multiple running back, because of the fact that they can all catch passes, there's so much speed and so much skill there. Like, I start with them around the 40% range. And then, like, if you've got the personnel where you can have three wide receivers on the field that often, then go for it. Like, if the right wide receivers can carry the load, and again, Hartman, like, their development grows so much because of the fact that they have a veteran quarterback working with them, that's fine. But it just, to me, it still feels like heavier doses of multiple running backs make more sense than multiple tight ends, because you've still got good tight ends in the room. You just don't have anywhere near the caliber of what you've got walking out the door right now.
Yeah, and a lot of it is kind of matchup wise because you could technically get into two tight end sets where one of them is kind of split out as a wide receiver, right? Like you use one guy as your kind of end guy on the line of scrimmage, and then you have another guy who could potentially, split out and play, line up as technically what you would consider a wide receiver, but he's just a tight end split out. And I think that's what they're going to have to do with Hartman is really disguise kind of those two tight end sets essentially and kind of get those mismatches that they want with a tight end on a safety up a seam or, et cetera, stuff like that.
Right. And look, I'm not talking about, like, when I'm talking about multiple running backs, kind of like Zach is saying, Theo Riddick type plays, for the bit, and then motion them outside. I'm not
Yes.
talking about lining two running backs up in the backfield, like those old school pro sets. I'm talking about, again, like we were talking last Friday about San Francisco and their use of 21 personnel. I'm talking about, okay, yeah, sometimes you can have an extra back in the backfield, but most of the time, because of the fact that, again, these guys, so many of they're all pass catchers basically, you can put them all over the place. You can do so many different things with those guys. They're going to be very versatile. So even though it says running back on the roster, they can do a lot of other things that'll function like wide receivers.
In recruiting terms, those are just what we call athletes, right? Like those are guys
Yeah.
that you can just stick wherever. They can catch the ball, they can run the ball. They're just good with the ball in open space. And I think that's what you're going to see a lot from the Notre Dame running backs. And, not to bring this back to the Cowboys, but I loved this play that they ran last night. I was behind, and so I didn't get to text you about it in live time, but they put Pollard and Zeke in the backfield, and I'm pretty sure they were in 21 personnel, and they motioned Zeke out to basically the slot and just had him crack down on the end guy on the line of scrimmage, and they did a pitch outside with Pollard. So, Zeke's coming down, and then Pollard's going to the edge. I mean, that's an easy play for someone like Estime being big and strong. You motion him out to the slot, you use him as a crackback blocker, and then you get someone like Diggs or maybe, Prince on the edge with their speed trying to get around the corner.
Yep, that's exactly what I was thinking. And Dallas did more 21 stuff last night as well, just like what you're talking about right there. And when you've got, a little bit, just enough different skill sets, when you've got a thumper like Estime, and then you've got guys like Price and Tyree with the kind of quickness that they have, and then, kind of like these combo guys as well. I just think that there's so much that they can do with them. And, they can cause so much havoc because of the misdirection and where they can line these guys up. They can basically line any of them up at any spot on the field they want to.
Yeah, and I think, and we'll get into this probably in a little bit too, but I just want to put this caveat in there right now is, if I think the more that they run 2-back and potentially even 3-back sets, that should drive up the need for a Buckner type package and being on the field. Because if you can put 2 running backs and 3 running backs on the field, and you add someone like Buckner, that's technically 2 or 3, 4 guys that you need to be accountable for in the run game. And getting Buckner off of two reads and then maybe hitting the edge, that's got to be something that's very much up Buckner's alley. I think you're messing up again. The microphone. It doesn't like your adjustments today, it seems like. Salty, if I would have known that this is where this conversation was going to go today, I would have had the whiteboard ready, but unfortunately I wasn't expecting to go there quite today. My apologies.
And I'm back. All right. So very annoying. I've got a little bit of a cough of my own, and I keep hitting the mute so I'm not coughing into the microphone. And apparently that has caused some of these issues, with the microphone going nuts. So I do apologize. But yeah, I agree with what you're talking about with Buckner. Like, I think we're in agreement that if Hartman is the starter, it makes sense for Tyler Buckner to have, like a red zone type package. That would seem like
an inside the 20 personnel.
Yeah, inside the 20 or inside the 15, wherever they decide it's going to be. Like, because of his mobility, it makes sense to be able to use him. So, we were talking about the running backs and the receivers and these different personnel packages. What about Chris Tyree? This is a big question for me. Is he a running back? Does he become a slot receiver? And again, you've got a very crowded backfield right now. And of the 3 running backs who were used this season, he had the fewest yards from scrimmage, but he also was used as a wide receiver. So, like, and you're lacking at the wide receiver position. So what do you think? What would you do with Chris Tyree? Does it make him, does it make sense to make him a slot receiver, or do you just find a different kind of souped up hybrid role that you can use him in?
Yeah, I was just getting ready to say, I think the best way to describe what Tyree could be used as is kind of like a jackknife, right? Like, he can do all sorts of different things, but I think his primary, I guess, skill set should be revolved around, catching the ball out of the backfield, and whether that's 2-back sets, and he's lining up as a running back, but instead of, he takes a play action and maybe flares out into the flat, or, maybe runs a wheel up the sideline, or other times he motions out of the backfield and then lines up in the slot and runs a route. I just think that his primary type of position needs to be centered around catching the ball, because I think that's his best output, and I think it will benefit Diggs and Estime. And I'm not saying that he's taking touches away from them. I'm just saying that those guys are better at running, just being straight runners. And Tyree is better at being a guy who can, again, line up in the backfield, maybe catch some passes out of the backfield. Maybe he lines up the backfield and motions out to the slot and they can get a coverage read. And then, if you see a good man-on-man matchup on 3rd and short, you just flick it out to Tyree real quick. Just stuff like that, I think, would be his best option.
Yeah, and I mean, he's not quite as thick as Deebo Samuel, but at the same time, he is a running back, and like it's kind of the inverse of Deebo Samuel, whereas Samuel is a wide receiver who they hand the ball to quite a bit. They didn't do it quite as much this year, but they still will do it. It's basically the other way around for Tyree. You can start him off, as a flanker, the slot or whatever, and still find ways to get him the ball, and they don't all have to be jet sweep type things. Or, you can do things like you were just talking about with that Pollard Zeke Elliott play last night. There's just, I think it really just depends on the imagination that Tommy Rees is going to have, because like if you're talking about him as a pure slot receiver, well, that's where Jaden Thomas is right now, and that's where Jaden Thomas has functioned from the best, is as a slot. And he was one of the biggest risers in terms of the receivers this year. So I don't know that you necessarily want to make Tyree exclusively that. I just think the bottom line is this is a guy with breakaway speed, and and who has quickness and he has a skill set unlike really anybody else on the roster. And you've just got to be creative enough, imaginative enough to find ways to get the ball in his hands like at least 5-6 times per game to allow him to make explosive plays.
Yeah, and that's a lot of maybe like tunnel screens, quick screens, out to the edge. Those are just extensions of the running game. Is what you hear Kirk Herbstreit kind of beat that into the ground a lot, is saying that these plays are kind of extensions of the run game. And another big area that I like Tyree again is like when you're 2nd and short, 3rd and short, like it's 2nd and 3, 3rd and 3, and that you need to, you got man coverage. Why not just throw it to him on a quick slant or a quick hitch, or just something like that where he's just working in space? Because I think more often than not, especially when he's in the slot, he's gonna beat a linebacker. Especially if guys are dropping off into coverage, he's gonna beat a linebacker one-on-one. It's not gonna be hard for him to break him off.
Right. And again, it's just another benefit of using the multiple running back groupings, whatever grouping it happens to be. David, kind of going back to the quarterback conversation, he says, so we're asking Buckner to go back to freshman year. What happened to the quarterback battle everyone was talking about when Hartman first committed? Well, I mean, we're obviously assuming Hartman is going to be the quarterback. And I think, again, this is something that we talked about last week. Like, if these two, there will be a battle to whatever extent for the number one job. But I think it was Vince and I talking about it. If they're neck and neck, don't you think that the job has to go to Hartman in that case, Jesse? Like, doesn't Buckner have to look and be head and shoulders better than a guy with 5 years of experience that you're bringing in, transferring here?
Yeah, the fact of the experience, and it's a transfer for one last season. You don't really bring in a transfer that has 1 year left with all that experience and all those passing accolades just to kind of ride the bench. And to go back to the original question, this doesn't mean that Buckner's a run-only type of package, but he introduces a new element of the game. And so when you start running kind of these design run plays, and then you see him, pull it and then drop a dart on someone, that's going to be very beneficial, because teams are going to be, loading up for what would seem like run plays, maybe loading up the boxes, and you're going to get, an extra hat on someone like Buckner. Well, that frees up someone else in coverage. And so after a few times of, showing these design run plays with your quarterback, he's proven that he can throw the ball at a high level too. So it's not all just run packages. I think he can, knowing what his legs can do and being in the red zone, I think you could trick a lot of teams of, okay, well, you think, you're loading up on run. He could still drop a dime on someone. If they want to play more in coverage, he's going to be able to get a one-on-one matchup and beat him with his legs. So I don't think it turns into freshman Buckner. I just think that inside the red zone, when you can add another threat of potentially getting in the end zone, it makes sense to have a personnel package designed around him.
Yeah, and again, if you've got Buckner on the field and 2 running backs and a couple wide receivers, then
It's a lot of
that's
hats to be accounted for.
yes, it is. It's a lot of guys who have to be accounted for, especially if you're talking about man coverage. So it's going to be pretty tough. And Jason says, I definitely want to hear. By the way, have you noticed the new display?
I was gonna say it. I like it. I like that I could see the pictures a little enlarged.
Yeah.
I know who's talking to me now.
Yeah. So Jason says he definitely wants to hear Hartman is the undeniable better quarterback, or I think it could be an issue. And see, I think it's the other way around. I don't think that he has to be the undeniable better quarterback. I just think that he has to be the better quarterback because, again, you brought him in as a transfer. I don't know. Maybe it's – what do you think about that, Jesse?
Again, I think that's definitely what I would want to see. Is I don't want it to be like a 51-49%. I want it, I want Hartman to be like a 60-40% better than someone like Buckner. I kind of agree on that statement and that doesn't take anything away from Buckner because you're still developing him at the same time. And I don't, he's going to get personnel packages. He's going to see playing time. But I do agree that I think that you want to see Hartman kind of be a level above, someone like Buckner, considering all of his experience, considering Buckner's experience, considering what Hartman can do in the pass game, and what kind of Buckner's deficiencies are in the pass game right now.
Yeah, and I mean, as Zach said, Hartman is undeniably more experienced than, as Salty was saying just a second ago. If you're counting actual playing time, isn't Buckner about a third of a way through his senior year of high school football? And yeah, that's about where he is when you count the playing time that he didn't get in a high school and what he's had so far in college. That's probably about where he is in terms of actual playing experience. So, I mean, you want them to compete for the job, but at the same time, I think it's pretty much expected that the guy with as much experience as Hartman has, and the guy who, Hartman is a guy who people around the country are talking about this, this is arguably the biggest prize in terms of the transfer portal this offseason that Notre Dame got, and there's a reason they went out to get him, because they had zero experience, zero real experience, zero starting experience coming into this season. And people are talking about, oh, why didn't we, go out to the transfer portal and all this different stuff. And I still, can understand the way they went about things. They thought that Tyler Buckner, could do it. He got hurt. He would. So I guess my point is, I don't even know what my point is at this point. I broke my train of thought, but I just, there's going to be a competition for the job. And I think the better man will win. And most likely it is going to be Sam Hartman. And so that's why you talk about developmentally for Tyler Buckner. It is better for Tyler Buckner if Hartman is the starter to at least be in there in some kind of package form. And again, it's not like you're just telling him to go out there and run the football. It's not that kind of package. It's just, it's a more wide open package, potentially, like if you're using him in the red zone. He's got a different skill set that Hartman doesn't have, even if Hartman's the starter.
Right.
All right. The offensive line is one of the other key questions. And, really, so they're going to lose Jarrett Patterson. They're going to lose Josh Lugg, the two guards. Really, it looks like Andrew Kristofic will probably be the starter at one of those positions. Billy Schrouth is kind of an up-and-comer, the freshman this year. And then Rocco Spindler is another guy. So I would expect those three guys to be the key three fighting, for those two spots. Again, I would give Kristofic a leg up because he was kind of a little bit of a swing man when Patterson came out. He was playing in that kind of thing. And Rocco Spindler is just like, came in here heralded 2 springs ago as a freshman. There was almost looking like a chance that maybe he was going to be the guy starting as a freshman. It ended up being Fisher instead, and really we haven't heard from Spindler the last couple seasons, basically since the season started last year. So now he's going into his junior season, and this is going to be a big spring for Rocco Spindler. I mean, it's going to be a big spring for all these guys, but really Spindler, I think, as well, because again, there's only 2 spots, and you've got 3 guys who are going to be fighting for these jobs.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of took my thunder away there. So I was Rocco Spindler was going to be my kind of spotlight because I think that Kristofic, like you said, he's got the most experience. He's kind of that utility guy that kind of bounces around where needed. He knows all the positions, right? But Rocco Spindler, like you were talking, he was a highly kind of coveted recruit coming out of Michigan. He was a 4-star with like a .97 composite. That's the type of guy that you want to see in year 3 step up, right? Like he should now have enough knowledge and experience and development learning under guys like Jarrett Patterson, guys like Lugg, Joe Alt, Blake Fisher. I just think it's time that Rocco Spindler needs to step up, and I'll actually be kind of highly disappointed if he doesn't because of the talent that he had coming out of high school and kind of the expectations that a lot of people had for him on the offensive line. So yeah, that's got to be, to me, the main answer. And I think that it'll kind of show what kind of overall offensive line unit that Notre Dame has is if someone like Rocco Spindler can step up and really, fill in some big shoes next season.
Yeah. Tommy said he hopes Kristofic earns the job. Otherwise, John will be in here telling us that Harry doesn't know what he's doing again. So we shall see. We shall see. I haven't seen John yet. This is usually around the time that he pops in, I think.
That's true.
Lately. So we'll see. All right. Do you have any other key offensive questions that we haven't addressed tonight?
Yeah, I want to know who you think is going to step up and be that dude at the wide receiver position next year. Like Hartman's number 1. Like he's like the Michael Mayer to Drew Pine. Like who's that security blanket? Who's that guy, the old reliable that he knows he can throw it to, when he's getting a little pressure on him?
It's going to be a good question because he's basically coming in here and he's got no experience with any of these receivers. Smith, the incoming guy from Virginia Tech, could potentially be a security blanket type guy because, again, he's the guy with the most experience and in terms of career production has more than anybody else. But like Vince and I last night were predicting who we thought were going to be the receiving leaders. Sean Hartman says Merriweather, and I don't think Merriweather is a bad choice because, again, there's so much talent there, and maybe kind of a bringing in a veteran quarterback who, again, knows how to get wide receivers the football. Maybe this is like a big blossoming for Tobias Merriweather. Maybe he does become that guy. I predicted when we were doing who's going to be the receptions leaders, and again, this is receptions, not necessarily yards. Like I could see Merriweather easily being the yardage leader, but I think that maybe Lorenzo Styles goes into this offseason, gets a reset, and kind of figures things out because it all seemed like it was about the gray matter, the stuff between his ears with the drops and the inconsistencies. They seem more self-inflicted, but at the same time, when the ball wasn't always coming his way with a quarterback who was locked in on number 87 all the time, maybe that kind of affects you as well because, it's like you're not used to the ball being there. And then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, you're throwing me a pass now, that kind of thing. I don't know how much of it was actually that, but again, like this is a really talented guy. We got to see that in the Fiesta Bowl. So I'm pushing, I'm hedging at least a little bit toward Lorenzo Styles, but I don't think you can go wrong with Tobias Merriweather and a talent like that when you've got a very experienced quarterback coming in. I think he's going to be able to recognize that talent pretty early.
Yeah, so for me, this comes down to 3 people. I have kind of the front runners, and I think that's going to be Tobias Merriweather. And it's Caleb Smith, right? The transfer from.
Yes.
I think Caleb Smith is also going to be up there just because of his experience. I think that's going to help someone like Sam Hartman because he's going to trust him in knowing that if the play breaks down or the coverage breaks down, he has that experience of knowing how to get open, right? How to move with the quarterback a little bit. So I think that he's up there. And I think my wild card or dark horse is going to be Jaden Thomas. I think that he had a really solid freshman year production-wise this last year. I mean, he had 25 receptions, 360 yards, and 3 touchdowns. And, those aren't like eye-popping numbers, but he made a lot of just good, solid catches. He's got a big frame. He's got good height. And I think that's someone that Hartman would really like to, kind of zone in on those big kind of crucial downs, because size, Tobias Merriweather just doesn't have the size. He has the length, but he doesn't have the size. And when you're boxing out corners on 3rd and short, kind of those kind of plays, or you're working over the middle a little bit, he's big bodied. He's going to catch those kind of passes and do a lot of damage. So I think Jayden Thomas is going to have a really good year, actually.
That was Vince's pick. And I still think he's going to be in the mix. I definitely think, and like I saw Jason mention Colsey as well. Colsey's going to be in the mix. I think it's going to be, we're going to see a lot more promise from this.
It's going to be a really loaded wide receiver room next year. And
I think there's a lot of talent to be in there. Like the growth in the receiver room, it might not have quite the kind of overall growth that we saw from the running backs this year, but I think it's got the potential to make a pretty good leap in that direction with some of the things we see. And like you mentioned, Thomas, like, no, nobody throws over the middle anymore. Well, and most of the guys you're throwing over the middle to are either tight ends, it's like that kind of thing, but wide receivers, you don't see it much anymore. But with a guy like Thomas, who's best out of the slot, with what you were talking about, the kind of size that he has, like you could see that, and then you're going to play man on him, and you're going to get him the ball. You can see him making some big plays, running away from some guys going over the middle potential.
Yeah, I like what you said. I think that Merriweather will probably be kind of the yardage guy, big play home run guy, but I think people like Smith and Jayden Thomas are going to be your reception kind of guys, that maybe have 2 times the amount of receptions, but half the yards, because, they're just hitting those kind of layup plays rather than the big home run plays. And I think that's more of what Merriweather is the home run guy.
Yeah. All right. Jesse, are you ready for rapid fire?
I am. I thought that was a very good offensive question discussion, and I know that rapid fire is loaded, so let's get into it.
You're just going to have to remember your whiteboard next time. I didn't even think about the fact, when we were doing all this stuff, that you didn't do whiteboard tonight. So shame on you.
I know. I got heckled for it, so I won't forget again.
So, Jess, what does it say about Notre Dame that they went to the college football playoff twice in 3 years and didn't have a player even sniff being a Heisman Trophy finalist?
I think it kind of shows how their playoffs went, honestly. I think it's kind of a mirror image of how those games went. Is they had enough talent to be overall, solid, and a lot of players who are, above average, but they didn't have that extraordinary player to kind of put them over the top and make maybe some of those Alabama and Clemson games closer, or potentially sneak out some sort of win, right? So, like, if you add someone like a Caleb Williams, that's like adding, 14 points to your score, it seems like, per game. So for me, I think it's indicative of them being, very solid overall, but not having that home run hitter as a player to take them over the top and beat, the hard teams as necessary. And you are clacking again.
All right, so here we go. So
take 3.
What's that?
I said take 3.
Just lots of fun. So to me, it says that they've had really good teams, but they haven't had the really big, true difference makers. And
Right.
And that's what separates, like when you talk about closing the gap and all that kind of stuff, especially considering their Notre Dame. Like Manti Te'o was a difference maker. He was a Heisman Trophy finalist. Brady Quinn was a difference maker. He was a Heisman Trophy finalist. Like Caleb Williams won the Heisman this year, and USC just missed out on the playoff. The other 3 finalists were in the playoff. Now, obviously, you can argue about, Stetson Bennett and all that kind of stuff, best player, or, the quarterback of a great team, won a couple of national championships. He did, whether you agree that he, deserved to be there or not. But the fact is, 8 of the last 10 Heisman Trophy winners have been on college football playoff teams or in the BCS championship. Like that's the case of Jameis Winston. And most of the other finalists, just like this year, you had Caleb Williams win it. The other 3 finalists were all in the playoff as well. And most of the time, most of them are quarterbacks, but at the same time, you have had some receivers and running backs and whatever, because Alabama's been there, but that's what you need is different. And so that's what it tells me. Again, they've been good, but they haven't had the true difference makers to push them over the edge and make them great. Because if you're at Notre Dame and you're undefeated in the regular season and you're in the playoff and you don't have anyone, like Ian Book got a handful of Heisman Trophy votes, but it's basically because he was Ian Book. If you had a true difference maker in that position or in a couple of other positions on the field, guys making game-breaking type plays offensively, you're going to get some guys in that Heisman room at the end of the season. And so that's what it tells me. It's like you still have to find the difference makers, but hey, guess what? This 2024 class is already shaping up, looking pretty good. After junior weekend and all that kind of stuff. So maybe it won't be too long, but that's what it tells me. You just got to get the difference makers out there.
Yeah.
Fill in the blank. It's blank that Irish wide receiver Matt Solano is coming back for his 6th year.
To me, this is fitting, and it's fitting because Solano reminds me of a guy, walk on, a guy who just loves being a part of the team, being there, getting any playing time, and now that he has gotten playing time is like an added bonus. But when you talk about kind of like a career guy who, made his way onto the team and earned his kind of roles, I think it's very fitting that he's kind of staying and finishing out that 6th year. So again, it embodies kind of the definition of what it means to be, like a walk-on player or someone who's staying and getting the most out of their time at a school like Notre Dame. So really happy that he's coming back for his 6th year because I think he's very reliable. He's very consistent. And he does a lot of things the right way. And I'm sure that Marcus Freeman, Chauncey Stuckey, those guys notice that kind of thing. And even though he's not elite with his speed and maybe route running and that kind of stuff, he knows how to do kind of all the little things wrong. He knows how to line up. He always knows what kind of route he needs to run. Even if that means not doing it at, the same type of level of someone like Tobias Merriweather, Jaden Thomas, etc. So really excited that he's coming back for his 6th year. And I'll be interested to see kind of what his output looks like this season. You are muted. But yeah, I agree with what you're saying there, Jason Smith. He is getting every bit out of his football experience as he can. Like imagine, like when you have a washcloth or a handheld towel, whatever, and you get it soaking wet and you're continuously like wringing it out, trying to get every drop of it out as much as possible. That's what I think of someone like Matt Solano is when you're squeezing that towel and you're trying to get every ounce of water out. That's what Matt Solano reminds me of coming back for his 6th year.
Yeah, Jesse, I don't have any idea why these technical issues keep happening, but it tells me like my browser got disconnected and all this stuff. Don't hit the mute button on your end. I know you're dealing with a cough. I've been dealing with it as well. I don't know if maybe. Unreal. Like I can't even move. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. You just cut out randomly.
Yeah, I know. Michigan President Santa Ono announced yesterday that Jim Harbaugh is staying at Michigan and not going to the NFL. Who's better off for it? Harbaugh, Michigan, the NFL, or someone or something else?
To me, the biggest beneficiary in this whole situation has to be Michigan. I know that, Harbaugh started off really consistent, right? But then his knock was that he wasn't winning the big games or the games that matter the most. Well, now he's, kicked it into that next gear. He's beat Ohio State twice. He's gone to the playoff twice, even though he got, embarrassed by Georgia and then upset by a team like TCU, it still says something that he was able to make the playoffs 2 consecutive years in a row. So I think for Michigan's sake and wanting to stay relevant in terms of beating Ohio State, being in the college football playoffs, being Big Ten champions, that this ultimately benefits the University of Michigan the most in their program, their football program.
Yeah, I tend to agree as well. For now, anyway. What I want to know is is every offseason, is this what we're going to have now? Like, is Jim Harbaugh going to keep saying, well, I want to stay at Michigan, and then he's flirting with another NFL team every year? Do you want to stay or not? Like, like sitting down here, nobody down here, obviously Notre Dame fans care how Michigan's recruiting is affected, but I would think at some point it's got to be affected, that like Jim Harbaugh keeps kind of having these dalliances. And like, the thing is, like, he's been there, 8 years or something like that at some point, or, at this point at Michigan. And this is the longest that he's lasted anywhere. He kind of wore out, his welcome at Stanford. He wore out his welcome quickly in San Francisco. And that was kind of always the thing that followed Harbaugh those last couple stops, is like, yeah, he'll turn your program into a winner, but at some point it kind of becomes a little bit too much. And, like peeking out the door all the time, looking at the next best thing. I don't know how good that is for your program. So I think it's good for Michigan to have him, and they've got a ton of talent, and, they'll probably end up in the Big Ten championship game playing Ohio State again next year for a chance to make it to the playoffs. So I think they're better off with him as their coach, but ultimately, like, the big picture stuff, I'm not sure about. The NFL, like, I think that the Broncos or the Panthers or whoever would ultimately end up being better if they had Jim Harbaugh as their head coach. But again, like, he's always got his, 1 foot out the door. So I don't know how long it would have lasted. So I think that the NFL is probably better with Michigan, or with Jim Harbaugh just staying at Michigan right now.
Yeah, I don't know how much of his game would kind of translate into the modern NFL at the moment, to be honest with you. And again, like you were saying, he's the definition of a flirt. Like, anytime the remote opportunity of something better comes along, he's not going to say no. He's going to court it, or at least entertain it to some degree.
Yeah, and I mean, like Stymie just said, Stanford still hasn't recovered from losing Harbaugh, and I felt like at the time, like, it was a matter of time before it really fell off for David Shaw. He actually took it a couple more years than I thought he would, but obviously it bottomed out after Harbaugh. And I've got to think that if Harbaugh was still there, they would be, legit, probably contending to be in the playoff potentially every year, because, he was doing the same kind of stuff there that he's doing at Michigan. It works, what he sells actually works. It's just, there's a lot of quirks and a lot of extra stuff that comes with it, basically.
Yeah.
All right. So Dallas was 12. They won 12 games in the regular season, but they didn't win their division. They were 12-5, didn't win their division. Tampa Bay was 8-9, won the NFC South, which meant they got to host last night's super wild card round game. So do you buy or sell division winners with sub 500 records hosting playoff games like last night with Tampa Bay?
So this is kind of a 2-part question for me, and I'll get into both of my answers. I first want to say that I think it's incredibly stupid on the NFL's part, and I understand why they put an NFL game on Monday night, because you have Buck and Aikman on ESPN now. So you have to, if you're paying those guys that kind of money, you're going to get a game out of them on Monday night. But the fact that the Cowboys now have to turn around and go to San Francisco and play on 2 less days of rest, I think that it's incredibly errant on the NFL's part, because not only did they not put the San Francisco game on Sunday, they put it on Saturday. So that means that the winner of that game was ultimately going to get, 2 days limited rest compared to San Francisco. So that's my first concern, first and foremost. And then getting into the original question, I 100% I sell that the division winners should get to host a playoff game when you're not over 500. I understand that you've won your division, but if you win a crappy division, and then someone like the Cowboys, who played in the best division in football, a la having 3 of the 4 teams in the NFC, round going into next week, there's no reason that Tampa Bay should have got to host that game with an under 500 record, because their division was crappy first and foremost. And then what's the purpose of playing a full regular season when the better team doesn't get to host the playoff game, and they're penalized essentially for having a better record because they played in a harder conference? So I'm in agreement that the better record, I wish that they would go to the NBA format, actually. And I agree. I don't necessarily care if you like the NBA or not, but I would be in favor of putting all teams in two sides, NFC, AFC, and then letting the teams with the 4 best records go on and host the playoff games. And you still play your division schedule, but I do think that the top 4 teams should be able to host their games regardless, because the Buccaneers played in a crappy division and the Cowboys got penalized for playing in the best division in football.
See, that's it. And I kind of had a feeling what your argument was going to be. And we didn't mention this before last night because we didn't want to seem like it was all sour grapes. Cowboys won, so I felt like, hey, we can go ahead and bring it up now today. Look, and I'm not touching anything right now because I don't want things to disconnect again. I have no idea what's going on technologically here, but I'm looking at John's comment. He says, if you win your division, you should host the wild card game. And I realize there are a lot of people who think that way, but if you win a division with a sub 500 record, that means that 3 other teams in your division are worse than you, which means you got to play a bunch of weak teams, and that's who you beat to win your division with a sub 500 record. So why should that be rewarded? The Buccaneers beat exactly 2 teams with winning records all season. They beat Dallas in the season opener. They beat Seattle as well, and Seattle ended up being a playoff team. Those were the only 2 playoff teams, only 2 teams with winning records they beat all season. They played in a horrible division, and in the meantime, like you've got, look at the NFC East right now. 3 of the 4 teams remaining in the NFC are from one division, and only one of those teams got to host a playoff game over the weekend. And you should not be rewarded for not even mediocrity, but sub-mediocrity. Like, if you win your division, okay, your reward is you still get into the playoffs, even though you have a sub 500 record because you won your division. So that you should not be rewarded with hosting one of the most important games of the season. That's just how I feel. And I think you like you said, like I saw Michael DeCourcy, of course, who is a longtime college basketball writer. He said today, like, if the NCAA did it this way, Duke would have been a 10 seed and Colgate would have been a 6 seed in the NCAA tournament last year. Think about that. Like, if you're using the same parameters to decide this. Yeah. All right. I think we're going to wrap up on this because we've had so many technical issues. We'll try to get through one more question and then wrap it up. I apologize for all the technical stuff tonight. We'll, do our best to figure out what the heck is wrong. Fill in the blank. It'll be blank if last night was the last time we see Tom Brady in an NFL uniform.
You know me. I'm still on the Tom Brady train. It'll be surprising if Tom Brady's not back next year. I don't think Tom Brady knows where he's going to be next season. I don't know. I don't think he has a plan for next season, but I ultimately believe that Tom Brady will be back next season. I don't think it'll be with Tampa, but it'll be a shock because I don't think you go through the unretirement, you go through, the divorce with Giselle, all to just play one extra season and ultimately have nothing come out of it, right? Like, yes, you won your division, but you were still a crappy team all season. You beat 2 teams with a winning record, and you capitalized on playing in the NFC South. I just think that he still has, and you heard Aikman talk about this last night, he's still got a little bit left in the tank. So it would be a shock to me if Brady isn't back for at least one more season, maybe even 2 going forward. You are you're still muted, by the way. John, I agree with you that he's not the same player, but I think the biggest issues that Tom had this year is one, he didn't have a run game. Two, he didn't have an offensive line that was worth a crap. I mean, he just got back his starting center last night, and his first game was in the playoffs. And he hasn't had, the defenses that he had in New England, and the defense that he had in the year that he won it with Tampa. So he lacked in having ultimately offensive line, a rush game, and a defense. And I know he can't control the defense, but it is still an underrated aspect of football, right? Like the defense never gets credit for Tom Brady's 7 rings, but they are a very vital part in his overall success in his 7 Super Bowl wins. So when he doesn't have a average to competent defense, he doesn't have an offensive line in unison, and he doesn't have any sort of run game. I mean, what is he supposed to do when he's getting pressured heavily and he's got to get the ball out quick? And we saw that last night against Dallas as they just ate up everything. So I think it's going to be shocking if he doesn't play. Do I want him to be done? Of course. I think his time has kind of spun, but again, I think that he's still got a couple more years left in the tank. One kind of, final question that we had too, considering that he is still having some technical issues, is, Peter Schrager from the NFL Network reported the other day that fired Arizona Cardinals head coach Cliff Kingsbury bought a one-way ticket to Thailand, and despite being contacted by numerous NFL teams for interviews, Schrager says Kingsbury told him, "No, I'm good." So overall, do we think that Kingsbury should change course and come back? So, for me in this situation, I think that someone like Cliff Kingsbury ultimately benefits from a one-way ticket to Thailand at the moment. And I'll tell you why, because he is extended through 2027. So that means those checks are still hitting regardless of whether he is coaching or not. And we've seen that, the kind of roller coaster that he's been on with Kyler Murray in Arizona. So for me, I think it would be very beneficial for someone like him to take the year off, reset a little bit, and then ultimately, still collect those paychecks. Because, I mean, isn't that what it's about? At the end of the day, you're still collecting the paychecks, and you're just sitting in Thailand. So I don't know about you guys, but I would love to ultimately be sitting in the middle of Thailand being paid not to coach football. So I think a reset for someone like Kingsbury is needed. But I would love to see him back in the NFL because I think he has a great offensive mind. I think that he can come up with personnel packages that might be beneficial for a lot of teams. But I think his next stage in his career has to be something like an offensive coordinator. I don't believe that he is an NFL head coach. I think that he could potentially be a college head coach. But I think his best role with a mobile quarterback would be something like an offensive coordinator. So that would be my guess on that. And then the final question that we kind of had is fill in the blank. It's blank that Al Michaels and Tony Dungy have been getting ripped for their lack of energy and enthusiasm for their call of the Jaguars comeback win against the Chargers Saturday night on NBC. So unfortunately for me, I was tracking this game for betting reasons, but I was out and about in Columbus, Ohio for my girlfriend's father's birthday. So no sounds were on for the TV for me, but I was, peeking around the corner, checking in here and there. So I couldn't necessarily hear what was going on with Al Michaels and Tony Dungy, but from what I've read, there was just no enthusiasm, despite, the Trevor Lawrence golden sombrero with 4 interceptions, and then the biggest comeback that I've personally seen coming back 27-0. So I would have to agree that I think it's absurd that these guys had a lack of energy considering this Jaguars comeback.
I suppose I'm here right now. I don't want to talk too long because it's probably going to happen again. I just had to reboot my computer. But, like the problem with NBC that they've got is they do one NFL game per week, whereas, CBS and Fox have multiple, like they've got what? They're 5-6 deep at all the positions, because they're doing many games per week. So NBC doesn't have a suitable number 2 guy because like last year, Mike Tirico and Drew Brees did the number 2 game, the Bengals Raiders playoff game. You remember that one? And that's the game where, Drew Brees was like a deer in the headlights and everyone ends up ripping Drew Brees. Tirico was fine as the backup play-by-play guy. But, like the whole Michaels thing, Michaels has never been an over-the-top kind of guy, to begin with. Like, do you believe in miracles? Yes. Like that's like some of the most emotion that he's ever had. And that's been 43 years ago at this point in Lake Placid. Tony Dungy is a low pulse kind of guy. Pairing them together and the fact they've never worked together, that doesn't help. But again, who does NBC have to put in that booth? All of their options are these studio guys because they only have one NFL game per week that they do. They bring Al Mike back, they pair him up Tony Dungy. Like if they would have done what they did last year, you would have had Jack Collinsworth and Jason Garrett doing a playoff game. And just imagine how that would have been ripped to shreds. And that's got to be why they brought Al Michaels back to begin with. But it's going to be interesting going forward because from what I understand, Noah Eagle, Ian Eagle's son, is going to be the Big Ten play-by-play announcer doing the Big Ten games starting next year for NBC. And that guy he's very young, but he is very good. He's about Jack Collinsworth's age, and he is probably 20 times the play-by-play announcer that Jack Collinsworth is. So I would think that maybe he gets that opportunity next year. But again, it's going to be who's going to be the guy in the booth with him. Typically, if you have 2 announcers, play-by-play analyst, and one is lower energy, like you need higher energy from the other guy to balance it out. You can't have 2 relatively low energy guys. But like I didn't get all of the criticism to begin with. I didn't think it was that bad when I was sitting watching in my hotel room the other night. It was like the game was good. You've got Al Michaels. Like, I don't know what more you need, but they got ripped to shreds for that broadcast. That's for sure.
They sure did, unfortunately. But I agree. The teeter-totter's got to be balanced. If you have a low, enthusiasm, you got to, pair it with a high enthusiasm. But I think we got to get out of here before you cut out again. I don't know if I could take another one.
Yes, I know. I mean, it's holding right now, but again, I had to reboot the thing in the middle of the show. So, all right. Well, thanks for a great job holding things together tonight, Jesse. And hopefully things are better the next time I pop in.
Yeah. Final question tonight. 15-1 or is it 16-1? Kansas at 15-2 Kansas State. Who wins tonight?
Well, it's Kansas. Come on. No, I mean, K-State is good. They've got that Baylor.
The line is just about even. The line's just about even. So I'm curious.
KU, the Jayhawks have been escaping with some very close wins this year, and that's a good team that hates them badly.
In Manhattan.
By the way, I saw
me of the fight. Remember when Beasley got in that fight against Kansas? That's what I think tonight's going to be. It's going to be high emotions and very physical, and I hope they let them play.
Yeah. Yep, that's true. Salty posted this because Vince and I did a draft of the Notre Dame assistant coaches yesterday, and apparently they put a poll up on the boards today for who drafted the better team. And Vince, at last count from Salty, was leading 29-28. So very even in terms of the teams of assistants we drafted yesterday. Here's what we drafted. I won't tell you who drafted which team, okay? Here's one team that was drafted. Brian Mason, Mike Mickens, Tommy Reese, Chris O'Leary, Al Golden. Okay. The other team, Harry Heestand, Dylan McCullough, Chancey Stuckey, Gerard Parker, Al Washington. Which group of 5 do you like better?
I like the second group of 5 just a little bit better.
Ding, ding, ding. We will end on that. That is my team. Thank you very much. Jesse is the deciding vote.
I had no idea this even happened, so please don't think that this is rigged. I had no clue what any of this was. I was actually curious what that was in reference to.
Yes. Thank you very much, John. Appreciate it. And I'm just kind of going. Well, I don't want to. Again, I don't want to go too far, but yes, Jesse did hold it down. That's for sure. And from Sean Paulus, Florida State out to a 13-0 lead over Notre Dame. So it looks like those donuts the other day did nothing good. So, all right. Well, I appreciate it. Hit the like button at your leisure, at your discretion, if you so choose tonight. Understand, if you abstain, but do appreciate it. And we will talk to you tomorrow on IB Nation Sports Talk.